Is it going?
I didn't see the numbers count down though, so
Oh, really? I
no.
did.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just waiting for the upload speed to pick up a little bit here.
Yeah. We can vamp a little bit while things get going. Um, I definitely have had some time to read some things and kind
Mm-hmm.
of um, pay attention to some interviews and just learn more about the story that I'm excited to talk about today.
Yeah,
Once our upload speed decides to not
it's
be a
getting there.
dick.
It's getting there. These are all the things we need to be concerned about. It's basically just going up and down like the stock market at this point.
Right, right.
So, cool. All right,
Let's cancel those tariffs and then we'll
and
we'll
we'll get
help
to
it out a little
100%.
bit.
Yeah. All right.
Ah, amazing.
Welcome back to What the Hype. This week, Laura and I are going to be diving a little bit deeper into season 3 of The White Lotus. We had a lot of fun doing some reaction videos just minutes after the episodes aired throughout the season. We did a full blown episode, I think it was after episode 3. So we were
Mm-hmm.
kind of inching up on the halfway point of the season. Now we felt it was only natural for us to jump in and to do a recap.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to dig into and theorize about. That is going to take a little more time to, let marinate as we take in the whole season and then reflect on it afterwards. Reactions are very much like shock and awe, what we saw that episode, and maybe making some theories about how we think it's going to go the rest of the season. But this is our chance to put on almost like our literary analysis hats, because this is a very intertwined story.
It is. And I like what you said because the reaction videos are in the moment and
Mm-hmm.
they're a little bit more raw. They're not as planned out. Whereas with this, we get the opportunity to sit with it for a couple days, maybe go back and watch the finale, maybe read some articles, listen to some other podcasts. I'm sure you've watched a few TikToks, Laura. I know you've sent a
Mm-hmm.
few over my way.
Yep. I've basically been spamming Micah with White Lotus TikToks.
It's fine. We were doing plenty of that during the season too, and
Yep.
a lot of fun fan theories that were out there. But before we get started, we want to make sure that you all are following us on social media and your favorite podcast app. Just search for What the Hype podcast. And don't forget, you can see full video episodes over on YouTube and Twitch, which we're live on right now. So, hello to anybody who is listening along. And we have a spoiler
Hello.
warning in here, but I feel like at this point, if you're listening to a season recap on The White Lotus, you probably should have watched the season.
Yeah, if you didn't and you choose to stay, that's on you.
Yeah, if you just like listening to us and that's the reason why, then we're all good with it.
Awesome.
hmm So, Laura, let's start with our favorite family from season 3 of The White Lotus, the Ratliffs. And one of the questions that I think we were toying around with on the reaction episode, but we didn't really dive deep into it. Were they this season's biggest red herring?
Yeah, I think we were led to believe that things were going to go way more wrong with this family than they actually did. And that's saying something because, the whole incest thing between Saxon and Lachlan, that was pretty bad. But I think we were led to believe that a lot worse was going to happen between Timothy's visions of taking out multiple members of his family to the point where he was on the precipice of poisoning all of them, inadvertently leading to Lachlan, the one child he didn't want to poison, getting poisoned and almost dying. So the fact that it all just kind of works out for the Ratliffs and they have this togetherness moment of money doesn't matter because we're a family was kind of surprising.
And a lot of that has to do with Timothy's transformation and him being
Mhm.
impacted by what happens to Lachlan. But I do like what you're saying about how we were led down this road for pretty much the entire season. There were tsunami warnings, right? Tsunami. I
Yeah.
can't do her voice as well as other people can, but right, there were a couple episodes where we were getting these types of clues and hints thrown our way. Timothy is set up early on in the season to be somebody that we need to have on watch because not only is everything falling apart back home, but he's digging into his wife's lorazepam and taking them on the regular, and he's having these visions of killing his wife and then killing his son, and then of course the pina colada party. He almost goes through with it. So I feel like we were taking down a pretty dark road with them, and I mean maybe we're happy we didn't get a payoff. It's nice that none of the Ratliffs ended up dying in this season, but it shows what great writing on the part of Mike White.
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean it really caused you to pay more attention to this honestly like kind of fucked up family. There's no getting around it. Um but I think, they were a lot less important to the overall series of events at the hotel than we thought they were going to be. Like they were pretty insulated amongst themselves, you
They
know?
were.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel shortchanged in any way in not seeing Timothy's family react to the news that
Yeah.
they're about to go home to nothing? I mean, I feel like most of the White Lotus fan base was deprived of an epic Victoria Ratliff meltdown.
Yes. I really wanted to see Parker Posey melt down about being poor and yell at Timothy, "You should have killed me."
Hmm.
And he'd be like, "Babe, you have no idea how close I came." Oh man. Yeah, I feel like that was something that made me feel like a lack of closure with their story just because we spent so much time on Timothy's mounting dread during this whole week when he's disconnected, fearing what's going to happen on the other side. And then it was like, it's okay, guys. We have each other. We don't need anything else. And as a viewer, I'm like, no, I want to watch. I want to watch their lives burn.
Well, lack of closure is certainly a theme throughout a number of these different characters. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
we didn't get everything as neatly wrapped up, maybe, as we would have liked. And you mentioned earlier, though, Timothy joking about how close it came to Victoria if, in fact, she were to figure things out. But along those lines, where I'm going with this is, you know, does nobody ever find out what Timothy did and what what with Lachlan? Like nobody did an investigation into why he got so sick and did he go to the hospital? He's on the boat literally hours later and he's looking a little
Yeah.
ragged. You know, to me there should have been a little bit more to that than just a secret maybe between Timothy and Lachlan. Like Lachlan probably at this point just thinks that he drank some bad coconut milk.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, it really did seem like nobody else in the family knew what had happened to Lachlan, which felt weird. Also weird that there was just a mass shooting in
Mm,
this hotel and everyone's like, "Bye, have a great summer." They get on their boat to leave. I was just like, that's a lot of trauma happening at this hotel, and y'all are just very nonchalant about getting on your boat.
totally. Yeah. And maybe that's a commentary on how we as a society generally respond to mass shootings.
Maybe.
We ignore them, we move on to the next thing, we pretend like they don't happen, and we know how Mike White likes to weave those things into the storylines. And so that is something though to talk about a little bit later on, because I agree with you. The lack of reaction to what happened at the hotel, even with Belinda and Zion when they're sailing off, the hotel staff are just standing there waving. Nothing happened.
Come back soon.
Yeah, they're like, not anytime soon. But I did want to go back to when you mentioned Lachlan. It's interesting to me how all the other members of his family don't even check on him. You know, they all have things that they say to him as they're walking out to breakfast, but it just shows how unobservant they are, because clearly there was something wrong with him even when he was just sitting on
Yeah.
the what would you call that, like the it's like a beach chair basically, and
Yeah.
he was like doubled over, but they were more concerned with going to breakfast than they were with seeing what was going on with their brother or their son in this case.
Yeah. Piper is literally like, okay, meet us there. And then he's like dry heaving,
Mm-hmm.
doubled over, and she doesn't even notice. I mean, that goes back to his line in the finale about being in a family full of narcissists.
Totally. And being a people pleaser, right? Not even in that moment wanting to speak up to say, "Hey, something's wrong with me. I need help."
Yeah.
So, which member of the Ratliff family do you feel like went through the biggest transformation this season?
Ooh. It's kind of a toss up for me between Timothy and Saxon. What about you?
I would go with Saxon. I
Yeah.
think Timothy certainly went through a transformation, but I'm not sure how much of that had to do with medication and alcohol
Yeah.
playing a major role throughout. Whereas Saxon, I feel like really started to think more about who he is and what he values, and we see that come full circle by the end of this season, thinking about the decision he makes not to get into a threesome with Chloe and Greg. That's probably something he would have jumped at the opportunity for when he first got to Thailand.
Hmm.
But more so thinking about how he speaks to Lachlan in the final episode, his interactions with Chelsea the night prior. You know, you see he's really looking almost for acceptance from her, and he's wondering why she's viewing him in the way that he is. And I wanted to say, to me, Chelsea is almost like a mirror for Saxon. She
Hmm.
tells him exactly what he needs to hear, even if he doesn't want to hear it. She's very raw and unfiltered with him. And I think by the end of the season, you do see him transform. You see him in that interaction with Piper with the book. Like he's the one reading now. And he's the one, you know, potentially exploring more than just what he considers to be for him. Yeah. So I would vote Saxon. I think Piper was just a surprise. We talked about in the reaction episode.
Hmm.
I don't know that she really went through much of a transformation. Maybe it was more of a revelation for her about who she actually is. Victoria, she's the same old
Yeah.
broad throughout.
And that was a little disappointing to me. Remember during the reactions, I was so convinced that there was something deeper about Victoria. She had such confidence in the fact that everything was going to be okay that it led me to believe maybe she knows more. Maybe she has some other plan. I actually felt the same about Sritala, who we'll talk about in a little bit here. But I thought both of those characters had a little more than met the eye to them, and it was a little disappointing to see that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and I do want to hear though on transformations why you feel like Timothy had the biggest one of the season.
Well, he spent the entire season having a mental break about the fact that his family wouldn't be able to survive poverty to the point where he's literally imagining killing them as being preferable to being alive and poor. And presumably, when they leave, he's accepted that it's better to be alive and poor than dead. So I think that is a transformation, but I agree with you. It was definitely a drug fueled panic that led to it. I think Saxon's transformation is a lot deeper than that and touches a few different um, themes. So yeah, I tend to agree with you.
There's something to be said for karma in all of this
Mm-hmm.
too. When we think about this family going on this very opulent, beautiful vacation, they have a ton of money, and they come to this place. And once they arrive, not long after, Timothy finds out that he's actually about to lose all of it because of the way that he's conducted some of his business over the course of the last couple
Yep.
of years. And I think we can probably pull that thread with other characters as it relates to karma, and so just knowing where we are in the world, right? And so want to definitely talk more about that. Just to kind of wrap up the rat list, I did want to mention a quote. I know earlier we touched on how we've been reading and consuming all this White Lotus media. This is from the Hollywood Reporter, and it's from HBO's post finale podcast where Mike White explained that the siblings, and he's talking specifically here about Saxon and Piper, represent the two arguments around Buddhism. So somebody who's like, I want to retreat to the monastery, not have any desires, and that's going to be the better way to live this life. Then you have the other who's calling them on it and saying, you're just afraid to have sex. You're afraid to do this. Don't run away from life. And that they both, brother and sister, are two different voices in Lachlan's ear. And Lachlan wants to give them both what they want. He wants to go to the monastery with his sister. He's going to run away from the world with his sister. And then with his brother, he's going to go to the parties and have sex. So I just thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And now, like, to pull back a little bit of the curtain to give us some insight into the thought behind these characters.
Yeah. No, that is really interesting because I know we've had this sense the entire season that Lachlan feels himself in kind of a tug of war with himself over which sibling he wants to emulate more and who he wants to influence him basically. So I love hearing that particular analogy for it, especially given all of the focus and attention that's given to the monastery in
Mm-hmm.
this series. It's
Yep.
cool.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit now about Belinda. We can include Porn Chai in this discussion. And of course, we have to include Zion, who is her deal broker, in addition to being her son. And in our instant recap, we touched on how Belinda leaves Porn Chai, much like Tanya leaves Belinda at the end of season one. And we just actually talked about karma. Do we want to pull on this a little bit more? And do we think this is setting up something for the future? Or is this the nice way of wrapping up Belinda's storyline in The White Lotus?
Yeah, so something I wanted to call out about this is the White Lotus official Instagram actually posted a side by side of
Mm-hmm.
these moments of Tanya letting Belinda down and Belinda letting Pornchai down. And I will say the vibe of the scenes is very, very different. But what's the same is the disappointment felt by Belinda in the first and by Pornchai in the second. So even though Belinda is not being terrible like Tanya was, she's still breaking Pornchai's heart in a way. I mean, we know that he's definitely into her. They haven't known each other all that long, but he clearly had some kind of romantic vision of them running a business together, and he's sad and disappointed, much like Belinda was sad and disappointed when someone who she thought was her friend was like, "Sorry, I'm going to go marry this guy. Oops, he murders me." you know. But there is a sense of karma in that because ultimately Belinda does get the money from Tanya that Tanya had promised her originally. I don't know if it was originally $5 million or if an amount was originally stated, but at the end of the day, Belinda got rich off Tanya. So that feels karmic
Mm-hmm.
in a way.
Totally. And Tanya's decision when she was much more nervous, I feel like, when she approached Belinda in season one, a little bit
Mm-hmm.
indecisive, whereas Belinda was very clear in her decision to porn shy. And of course, their conversation gets cut off by the mass shooting that happens. So it's unclear if they spoke at all after the fact. But given what happens, probably not a whole lot of time between that and when they leave Thailand. So I do really like this, and the fact that Gary is involved in both cases, right? In
Mm-hmm.
season one, it's Gary he's essentially what is taking Tanya away from Belinda. And in this case, he's giving Belinda everything that she needs in order to move her life forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I still, uh, I will say for me, probably one of the biggest surprises of this finale was Belinda doing this. I think her character has been established in such a way that it was kind of difficult to see her, taking the money and running. But I love that the commentary is like, everyone's got a number, you know?
And something
And
good finally
yeah,
came out of one of these finales.
yep.
It feels like we've lost characters the last two seasons that were quite enjoyable to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the one thing I think we can look to, especially with the way this season ended with Rick and Chelsea, that maybe we have a little bit of something to smile about. Even the music that plays at the end as they're sailing off, it's like it's more upbeat, it's happier.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't help but smile a little bit for Belinda. And I think Tanya's probably smiling from up above as well. And that brings us to Gary and Chloe. And we were just talking a little bit about the karma aspect of it, but you have a good point here, Laura, about the groups that Chelsea mentions when she's talking with Saxon.
Yeah, so Chelsea was talking about these karmic groups. Um, And it's with the implication that there's something mystical that draws groups of people together who don't know each other and otherwise wouldn't meet. And so she says to Saxon, for all we know, we could be in the same group and just not know it. And that's why we're here at the same time. And I wonder if the implication or like the overarching implication here is that there is something mystical about the White Lotus that draws specific people together at specific times. Um, because think about like what are the odds of Belinda and Gary ending up in the same place given the one person that they have in common, right? It almost feels a little too perfect.
Yeah.
So I just wondered about this mainly because when I watched the first season, I kept getting this sense that there was something deeper and more nefarious about the White Lotus chain of hotels than what was being shown on screen. And nothing ever came of it. But then I got that feeling back again in watching the way this episode ended, especially with how spiritual Chloe is throughout the season, or Chelsea is throughout the season. Um, and really paying attention to how that might color the rest of the series because Chelsea's like dropping bad omens throughout this series, and basically everything she says ends up coming true.
Hmm.
Like bad things happen in threes, So I don't know. It just made me wonder if there's something a little more spiritual at play here.
Totally. I think that there is, and just given the part of the world that we're in and the religious aspect of it all, that there is a strong likelihood that there's something to what Chelsea is saying. And I think that, for Saxon in particular, he needed Chelsea in his group in order for him to go through the transformation that he does. And as you said, what are the chances that Belinda and Gary's paths would cross? I don't know exactly how many years it's been. Presumably, it's been at least two since they've seen each other, maybe a little bit more than that. But the fact that they would be in Thailand at this hotel at exactly the same time, yeah, there's
Yeah.
certainly something to that. And you did mention Chelsea, and we're going to talk a little bit about her coming up, as well as a number of other characters. But first, we need a quick word from our sponsors.
Do the little pause for edit.
All right, well, welcome back. We are analyzing all of the White Lotus season 3 characters this week. So far, we've talked about the Ratliffs, Belinda, Pornchai, Zion, Gary, and Chloe. But let's shift focus and talk about what's definitely the most tragic of situations this season, and that is Rick and Chelsea.
Yeah.
Laura, why did Rick go back to the hotel?
Honestly, I don't know. I think right after I saw it, when we were doing the reaction, I was still so fresh off of it. I hadn't had a chance to really think about it. And I was like, well, like, where else would he go? He has to go get Chelsea and get on the boat. But it's like, no, like, you could have brought her to Bangkok and taken off from there. Why do this?
Great questions.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell if it was because Rick was having an episode. I mean, he seemed really manic there after the confrontation with Jim at the hotel, and he like lost all sense of calm, cool, and collected that he had come back to the hotel with in the first place. So I guess I can only think he wasn't in his right mind. I don't know if he was on the edge from, I mean, I assume he was part of the bender that took place the night before. Like, I'm sure it
Seemed
wasn't
like it.
I'm sure it wasn't just Frank doing drugs, you know.
No, I think he enjoyed himself. I don't think he
Mhm.
maybe went as far as Frank did, but he certainly partied it up from the look of things. But he was ready to get out of the hotel, and even though Frank is chasing him down the hallway in his Speedo. So I did think it was so strange, though, the way that Jim chooses to interact with Rick at breakfast that morning, and
Mhm.
it's almost like in some way he's goading him. Right? He says, "Oh, you're gonna try something," and he flashes his gun like they're in an old western or something like that. And it's clear that Jim doesn't have any love loss for Rick's mother, but why not come clean with him in that moment? Why not tell him the truth? Because regardless of whether or not they reconcile, at least the truth would have been out there, and we wouldn't have gone down that road of the mass shooting.
Yeah. I think unfortunately Rick was already primed to do something like this, and if this hadn't set him off, something else would have. Um but I agree with you. It doesn't really make sense to me, like, why the lie? I mean, especially when your kid is a grown ass 50-year-old man. Like, you're not having to be a parent to that person at this stage. Like, they just want to know what happened. And I will say that's something that kind of disappointed me about the Rick story, because we spent so much time focused this season on Rick's quest to find out what happened to his father. And I don't really feel like we got the full story. Like, we got that brief description of what Jim has accomplished in Thailand, but I don't think Rick ever gets anything even resembling closure to explain, like, why did you leave me? That never happens. So, I don't know. It felt like a missed opportunity to me. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and it almost would have been better for Shritala to never tell Rick the truth.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think Rick's defining moment was the fact that he didn't go through with it at the Hollinger house.
Mm-hmm.
It's that he was willing to pull himself back because, and there could be a lot of reasons. It's because he's looking down at Jim and he sees this feeble, defenseless old man who's in no position to react in any way. Or perhaps Chelsea's gotten to him a little bit and she was behind him not doing the deed there. And I just, to your point, like, I just can't, like, feel good about how his story wrapped up. If it left me wanting a little bit more there. And what's disappointing is that we had 8 episodes to get there,
Mm-hmm.
two more than we've had in previous seasons. And it still feels like there's so much more here that could have been done to kind of close the loop on a lot of these character stories.
Yeah, and I will say, we'll talk about this a little more when we get to unpacking other questions we have. But there were a number of deleted scenes
Hmm.
from this finale, as I understand it. And I believe I've also read about some dropped storylines that like hit the cutting room floor throughout the season. So it makes me think that maybe the cast of characters was a little too full and they were having a hard time completing everyone's story. I know I was reading about how the Mean Girl trio, as I call them, apparently a lot of their stuff did not make the final cut. So that just makes me think this was a really full season, and maybe some of these characters could have been held for season 4.
That's
I
always a
don't know if, yeah,
possibility.
I don't know if
It,
that's a hot take or not, but
it makes me think about. So you mentioned how Chelsea early on in the season says, you know, bad things always happen in threes, and we talked about how Chelsea deals with the robbery, then the snake, and then ultimately gets killed in the finale. But I was listening to an interview with Sam Nivola, who plays Lachlan, and he said, "Yeah, it was put out there for you right at the beginning. You just didn't realize it. With bad things happen in threes. There are three siblings. There are three mean girls. There are three deaths at the end of the season. So we're not counting the bodyguards. So
yeah,
if we count the
no.
bodyguards, there are more than three, but for the purposes of this. So I thought that was really quite interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, they've been telling us the entire time.
Just got to pay attention.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to say about Rick or Chelsea, or you had said earlier you wanted to talk a little bit more about Shritala?
Yeah, I mean, mainly just because I was surprised there wasn't a little more there. She just seemed so mysterious the entire season, and I thought that she might be holding on to something. And I don't want to say, the identity of Rick's father isn't a big deal, but the guy's 70 and Rick is 50. So it's like you have to take that news relative to like the context that you're giving it in. So I just thought there was something more there. I thought the theory about Sritala actually being Rick's father was really interesting, especially because they dropped so many references throughout the season to um I think the term is offensive, lady boys. So, you know, trans women. But there were a lot of references to that, and it made me wonder if they were kind of priming the audience and priming Rick for that reveal to happen. That would have been a lot more satisfying to me than what happened with Jim.
Especially given Frank's whole conversation
Mm-hmm.
when we first meet him, and
Right.
Rick is just sitting there digesting it all, taking it all in. That also would have been a really good primer for us as viewers if, in fact, that's what ended up happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would have liked there to have been a little bit more with Rick and his father. Now, let's talk about the person responsible for Rick's death, Gaitak. And speaking of transformations, in terms of what they went through throughout the course of the season, now not without a little bit of nudging from Mook, but Gaitak really caves to the pressure of his job. And I would argue compromises his morals because in this episode, we see him even willing to give up his job because he doesn't want to turn Valentin in, because if we're to believe what he says, he's going to return home to Russia and they're going to kill him. And so that probably weighs too heavily on Kaitak's conscience. And he's just a good guy. But ultimately, the heat of the moment when the mass shooting is happening, and probably all of what Mook has built up in his head over the course of the season finally gets to him. And we don't really see the fallout from that either. We see him like dressed up, and Mook's being sweet on him, and he's getting into the car to drive Shritala off to wherever she's going to. So clearly, he walked away from that situation the better for it. But that doesn't seem like him. Not the person we saw the entire show.
No, and I almost wonder if that commentary is meant to say that oftentimes to chase success, we all have to sacrifice our morals a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well put.
Yeah.
It,
I will
it's
say, though, I kind of feel like again, this is another case where I was expecting something more
with Mook.
with Mook. Exactly. I feel like they kind of wasted Lisa. Like anybody could have been cast to play this part, but they got this enormous international superstar who is already a phenomenal performer. I feel like they could have given her more to work with.
Mm-hmm. But maybe that goes back to the point you were making about there being too many characters this season. Is
Yeah.
do we feel that? Do we feel like there was too many storylines to have to follow?
I'm trying to think about the prior seasons and think about whether there's a notable difference in the amount of people, and I don't know.
I think it's pretty balanced.
I think it's about the same, but for some reason it just felt crowded this season, and I don't know what to attribute that to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now we're left with Mook presumably okay with being with Guy Talk because he has risen within the ranks at the White Lotus. I mean, there's no other bodyguards, right? So
Yeah.
Rick made sure of that.
Yeah. By the way, can we talk about how Jim is like pretty confident to be showing the location of his gun for a man who has the worst security guards ever? Awful.
And I rewatched it, and one is having a cigarette, the other is going on their phone. Like, anyway, they were not the brightest bulbs in the drawer. They
Mm-mm.
didn't even check Rick when he came to the Hollinger home to see if there was anything on him. So,
Yeah.
they basically were the ones bullying Guy Talk the entire season, yet they were horrible at their jobs when it mattered most.
Right.
Okay, well, let's wrap up talking about all of the characters by spending a little time with Jacqueline, Lori, and Kate. How do we feel about these three? Do we think they've truly reconciled? No.
Nah. Nah. That
You don't think the
it.
mass shooting brought them together?
No. No, I don't think so. I think they are a frenemy trio. I think that has always been their dynamic ever since they were in high school. Is when they're around each other, they seem to want to one up each other and like triangulate against each other. It's weird. I think they're going to go home and Jacqueline's going to make a bunch of like beautiful Instagram posts about her rewarding and life changing time in Thailand with her besties. And then they're not going to talk again for like a year. And they're probably not going to go on vacation again for like another decade. At which point it's like wash and repeat, you know? I just think these three are in a cycle together that they've been going through since they were kids.
Mhm. I thought Lori's speech was great during their little dinner where they were
Mm-hmm.
all coming clean with each other. I know we talked about the genuine nature of what was being expressed when we did the reaction video. I'm not sure has have any of our opinions changed, or do we feel like they were all being truthful? Were they all being fake? Was it a mixture?
So here's the thing. I think in the moment they all felt like they were being truthful, but in my head canon, because I've known trios of friends like this, there's a lot of lip service and a lot of feelings when they're together, and then when they're apart, it's like that never happened. You feel
Got it.
me? Like, I, and that's just my personal opinion. I would be really interested to know what others think. I also just did not like them. I oftentimes found myself wondering what their story was going to contribute to the overall narrative, and it really doesn't.
What do you think it's a commentary on? Because clearly they were put there for a reason by Mike White.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think they were a commentary on probably a lot of different archetypes. Definitely, like you remember the comments from Lori about Jacqueline being an aging, insecure actress, who's like very vapid and surface level. You have Lori, who is kind of going through a midlife crisis because she poured so much of her energies into her job and her marriage fell apart. And
She's a single mother.
yeah, she's a single mother, so she's feeling like a failure. Like I think it's meant to be a commentary on the insecurities that people, even if they are sort of a higher status economically, which clearly these three are, that doesn't suddenly mean you have no problems. And I think that's it. And I think it's a fine commentary. I just kind of wish we would have spent more time on really getting closure for the Ratliffs, and also really digging more into the Rick and Jim
Hmm.
dynamic.
That's fair. Well, coming up, we're gonna talk about some unanswered questions, some other things that we feel just haven't been done justice. But first, we need to get a quick word from our sponsors. All right, welcome back. And we've covered a lot of ground doing a deeper analysis of all of these characters, but there's still a few questions to answer, right, Laura, including where's the White Lotus headed to next? But first, these were a collection of questions that kind of sprinkled around the internet. And I wanted to start off by asking, what was the deal between Victoria and Kate? We never get resolution to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely seen some speculation online. One of my favorites that I saw was somebody theorizing that Victoria is old money and Kate is new money.
Ooh.
And because of that, Victoria's like, no, you can't sit with us,
Wow.
basically. So I kind of liked that. That felt pretty on brand for Victoria.
I can see that. Speaking of money, where does Rick get his?
Yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I was like, no, but like, we know where Gary got his money.
Right. And maybe
Where
this
do
has
you get
been
yours?
a history for Gary. Maybe Tanya's not the first.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It does, even from the beginning of their relationship in season one, it feels sketch.
Hmm. And there's definitely we I keep going back to older episodes, but the dinner conversation, however short it was, between Rick and Gary, we said real recognize real, right? They
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not sure what kind of business Rick is in. Maybe he's a hitman. Maybe he just does some underhanded things he gets contracted and does it all under the table. I don't think that would surprise me.
Yeah, he's the ghoul in Fallout. So he hops over to that franchise and then he hops back over here.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I guess it could be any number of like undisclosed black market
Right.
activities, but it would be interesting to know what exactly it was and also to know what it was about Rick that made Chelsea feel like they were soulmates. Because just based on her character, it would seem to me unlikely that she would get tied up with somebody who was making money doing something illegal.
Something
So,
that doesn't let him
yeah.
go to Australia, right?
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, what is it that she can excuse it?
She does say something. I forget who she's talking to. Maybe it was Saxon. That when they first met, he told her all about his life,
Mm-hmm.
but that's kind of vague. Like,
Yeah.
and do you really tell everybody? Do you really tell somebody everything when you first meet them?
No.
No. So,
No. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's really clear too that we have a situation with an age gap, and that's not to say that relationships with age gaps can't be successful, but they are more
could
complicated for that reason. And I think Chelsea is kind of naive and has a sort of I can change him mentality. I can save him. And obviously she can't.
she tries up to the very
Mm-hmm.
last minute. Do we think then that there's a little bit of Rick being a father figure as well to her?
Yeah, that is a little weird
I mean,
to think about it that way. But I
we are at the
mean,
White Lotus.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I don't know, it feels at times, it does feel like he chides her in the way a father might a
Hmm.
child. Um, their relationship is not a healthy one. I know everyone loves Chelsea. She was like the breath of fresh air of the season. I loved her character too, but the way she loved Rick, that ain't
Wasn't
healthy.
healthy.
No.
Chelsea's death is definitely the most tragic of any of the characters of this season.
Yep.
Why don't we see any of the characters who are close to her react? There's no visible reaction from Saxon on the boat. There's no visible reaction from Chloe in the scene we see of her, and she's just spent the better part of Chelsea's vacation hanging out with her. Maybe we're led to believe they don't know, but it does seem strange. Like there's no crime scene, there's no reaction to the mass shooting that's just taken place. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but even in like season 1, or like there's in season 2, like we see the police. It's very strange.
Yeah. This is making me think of when Belinda confronts Fabian about Greg at first, and she tries to convince him to call the police, and he refuses to do so. And he says that our resort attracts, I can't remember what exactly he said, but he essentially said it attracts, eclectic people who have eclectic tastes. And, we want this to be a safe place for them. So I wonder if that is also at play here, with the fact that there really doesn't seem to be any police presence making a big deal of this. All we see is body bags at the
Mm.
end. That's like the only indication that some crew arrived to address the scene, but we don't see who that is. It's definitely not the police.
Yeah. It just seems strange to me, and especially given how close Saxon and Chelsea get towards the end of this season. And then, as we mentioned, Chloe and Chelsea are thick as thieves, basically, the entire
Mhm.
season. So that was a little bit disappointing. We addressed this a little bit, the Ratliff's lack of reaction, or maybe just knowledge about what happened to Lachlan.
Yeah. And
I
like
mean, if that came out,
Timothy,
Timothy probably would go to jail. I mean, he's going to jail anyway.
yeah. He's like, what's one more charge?" Um but yeah, it is strange, and I wonder if Timothy even acknowledged to Lachlan what happened, or if he's just taking that secret with him to the grave and nobody will ever know.
Well, I mean, it's going to open up a huge can of worms, right? Because then, by extension, he tried to kill his whole family the night before.
Mhm.
So if that got out, forget about it.
Yeah, they're like, why did you put the seeds in the blender?
On the topic of money, I'm not regularly transferring millions of dollars from one bank to another, but I got to imagine a $5 million wire transfer would raise some flags.
Yeah, I don't imagine that I'd just be able to log into my bank one day and see $5 million in there. Although, if somebody wants to prove me wrong, let me know. I'll send you my routing info. But it does feel like a little too convenient. And Micah, you actually had some suspicion towards the end of the episode that maybe Belinda wasn't going to sail off into the sunset.
No, no, I kept expecting the boat to blow up, but I feel like that would be a little too excessive, and given everything that had just happened, and it would have been way too easy to tie it back to Gary, who is still kicking. 3 seasons in, he's made it through, so good for him.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of wrap up these questions, Laura, you had a good one in here. What the hell is the point of Fabian?
Yeah.
I mean, he can
Yeah.
sing. We only got about 5 seconds worth, but
Yeah,
he,
he just does that, and he's creepy and awkward, and that's it. The last two general managers both had stories.
oh, they were great. I mean,
Yeah.
Armand and Valentina, they were fun to watch. Any
Mhm.
minute they were on screen, like you were talking earlier about how certain characters this season, you could have easily just fast forwarded through. Anytime either of them were on, I was watching because
Mm-hmm.
they were just so fun to watch, so funny.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, Fabian is one, honestly, I don't think him being there makes a huge difference.
They need a general manager, yeah, but I don't think he was.
Yeah. He didn't serve the role that the general manager usually does in this show. And I mean, granted, that could just be Mike White shaking it up and like trying not to get locked into a format, which I can see. I mean, this show is actually tonally pretty different than the first two seasons. And I will say, although the ending left me with a lot more questions than I'm used to with the White Lotus, and it left me feeling like there were some opportunities to like have more satisfying endings for some of these characters. I loved the slow burn of the season. The pacing throughout the season was really, really good. Um, Mike White actually gave an interview recently. I don't know if you heard this or read it, Micah, but people, some people came at him with opinions about how quote slow the season was, and he was like, "I'm edging you.
Oh, I
That's what
did see
I'm
that.
doing." Yeah. And it's so true. It's so true because the end of every episode leaves you like wanting more. So in that regard, I really, really, really like the season. The finale, like, I think it kind of stumbled the landing, but still overall, I'm really invested in the White Lotus and I can't wait for the next season. And I really hope they bring some of these characters back because there is still more to be done with them.
I agree. Which characters would you put at the top of your list if you had to pick two or three that you would like to? And they don't necessarily have to be from this season. They could be from seasons
Mm,
one or seasons two.
yeah. Oh man. If I get to include season 2, I mean, I think bringing Portia back from season 2
Mm-hmm.
would be really good timing. And like a really nice beat because it does feel like Greg Greg Gary feels like his story might be wrapped. I don't know if we're going to see him again, so it would be a nice change of pace to keep the Tanya connection alive through Portia. Um I would really like to see from this season. I think having Porn Shy be the new Belinda, effectively, like be the White Lotus employee who appears at another location. Maybe not next season, but in a couple of seasons. And I actually think there's a lot more they could do with Saxon because he started out as kind of like a frat boy douche, but I think his character actually ended up being really interesting and showing a lot more depth. um, so there was a lot more to him than met the eye, and I think they could do more. What about you? Who would you like to see come back?
One of the things I think they could do is maybe even go back prior to season one, and that would allow for, let's say, an Armand, if we really loved him the
Yeah.
way that we did as a general manager in Hawaii, or even potentially to bring Tanya back. Right? Presumably, she's been to other White Lotus vacation spots before Hawaii. I do like Portia. I think there was a theory out there that got debunked that she was the daughter of that Lori mentions that's back in New York.
Oh.
So that, I mean, they could still make that come true, and
Yeah.
that could be fun. But I'd be interested to see if her and Albie ever got together, or maybe they're going on a trip. But from this season, I would have said Guy Talk early on, but I feel like we know his story. I feel like he's pretty
I
comfortable now.
Yeah, I feel like his story is complete. Now, if
Lachlan might be
yeah.
interesting too. I mean, he's
Mhm.
got to go through college, I think, but to see what becomes of him,
Yeah.
and especially after this experience.
Yeah. Maybe he comes back to Thailand to have another threesome, not with his brother.
Yeah.
He's got a palate cleanse.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of location, any preference? Now, I've heard some early discussion. It was made very clear Mike White does not like the cold, so there's not going to be somewhere up in the snowy mountains of Europe. That's not happening. But he did say that, and I think this was on the post show recap that uh, HBO did, that he's good to move away from like the crashing rocks and the waves for a little bit. So that leaves a lot of doors open. But on the reading that
Yeah.
I did, Europe came up a bit. I know we were in Italy, but maybe some other parts of Europe that aren't on the coast.
Yeah, definitely Europe. Um, Also, I feel like Latin America could be prime
Mm-hmm.
for this. And it really just depends. I mean, if he's saying no more beaches and he's also saying no cold environments, I wonder where all the, because it's all Four Seasons hotels, right?
Pretty
Like,
much.
I wonder where all they have resorts.
I mean, I don't think they're going to give up on that deal anytime soon. It's great for
No.
business.
Yeah, totally. Totally. I'm looking at their website right now. Um, oh yeah, holy shit. There are so many places.
Really.
I mean, US and international, Asia, they have many locations in Asia. Also Latin America, Europe. So yeah, there's a lot of Canada.
Mm.
We could have the White Lotus Canada. Everyone will be super polite. Um, that could actually be really funny. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, sky's the limit. If we're just saying like only snow locales are out, then pretty much everything else is in.
Cool. Well, Laura, this has been a lot of fun as always, talking about the White Lotus. We'll have to check out for the time being, and then I feel like we probably have what, a year and a half or so until White Lotus season 4, which has been picked up by HBO, will
Yeah,
return. Feels like about a year and a half or so is the right amount of
I
time
think
here.
so. Was that about the same weight from season 2, like a year and a half to 2 years?
I think so. I'd have to go
Yeah.
back and check honestly.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see if they stick to the 8 episode format going forward or if they drop back to 6.
Yeah, I'm just looking up when season 2 aired. 2022, October of
Oh,
2022.
wow. So it's been like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, dang. Time means nothing anymore. Ever since COVID, my concept of time is totally thrown off.
Hmm. Cool. Well, thanks to you and thanks to all the listeners for joining us on this episode. Don't forget, be sure to follow us in your favorite podcast app, leave us a review. We want to know what you think about the show. And of course, follow us on social media. We're at What the Hype Podcast on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch, and at What the Hype Show on X. Our website is whatthehypepodcast.com. And if you want to email us about anything, you can do that at whatthehypepodcast at gmail.com. And Laura, I know you've been busy doing a lot of these podcasts, and you have some other exciting content coming up in the near future.
Yeah, so the White Lotus has been ever so kind to reserve its time slot for The Last of Us, which is premiering its second season this coming Sunday, April 13th. Myself, Eric, and special guest Chelsea have kicked off coverage of season two of The Last of Us. So, right now, the day that you're listening to this episode, we have two episodes out for The Last of Us ahead of the premiere. The first one is a recap of season one to get you up to speed if you need a reminder on what all happened and you don't have time to go back and watch everything. The second episode is actually a spoiler ridden episode of the events of the second game and our theories and predictions of how they're going to adapt those events for the TV show. So, really, really fun. You can listen to that either audio on the podcast feed or you can watch the videos on YouTube. But you should go check it out. And much like we've done for the White Lotus, we will be doing episode reactions right after episodes drop on Sunday night. So, definitely be sure to join us for those. It's going to be a ton of fun.
I'll definitely check it out. I've seen the first episode of
All
season one
right.
of The Last of Us. I watched it actually when I was in Chicago visiting Eric and Meg, and I forced them to watch The White Lotus. So it was a little bit of a trade off.
Perfect.
But Eric still has to catch up, I believe, on season three of The White Lotus.
I know. They need to get up to speed on that because I know they got really into it and they're pretty obsessed with White Lotus at this point, but I get that it's a lot to catch up on all at once.
And finally, does a friend or family member need convincing, like Eric, about why The White Lotus is worth a watch? Share this episode with a friend and tell them that we're walking through every aspect of pop culture each and every week. And that's the hype on The White Lotus. Laura, thanks so much again for joining me.
Yeah,
And
thanks so much, Micah. It was fun.
we'll see everybody next time for The Last of Us.
Bye-bye,
Bye,
y'all.
everyone.
Awesome, awesome. Good job.
Cool.
That
Mine's
was
lagging a little bit, but we should be
that's